Hey everybody, this is our next story. It is our final story in our coexistence unit. It is a short story by Shinichi Hoshi, which is called Hey, Come On Out. Here's a picture on the left-hand side of your screen of the author. Over at the right-hand side, you've got some illustrations from his short stories. It says at the bottom of your screen, he was born in Tokyo, 1926, and died in Tokyo, 1997. Hopefully you were able to download the notes or maybe get a printed copy. It certainly helps a lot when you're taking a quiz if you've written these things down in your notes, because you're certainly able to use your notes when you take a quiz on Socrative. Just in case you didn't know where it's located, like with the rest of the world, this is a illustration of where Japan is and where Tokyo is, where the author was born and died. Now, Hoshi was recognized as one of Japan's most influential science fiction writers of all time, very well known and very well recognized and very well respected as a science fiction writer. He graduated from the University of Tokyo in agricultural chemistry, and he proceeded to go to graduate school. Didn't work out as well as he wanted it to. He quit in order to join his father's company, which was called Hoshi Pharmaceuticals. When his father died in 1945, he took over the firm and became the head of the company, but didn't do very well. The business failed, and he was forced to retire in 1957 from the pharmaceutical company. I think that is a quiz question on Socrative, so you might want to note that. Hoshi was said to have written at least 1,001 short stories. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the rumor. He was best known for his short stories, 3 to 4 pages in length. He was called the King of the Short. This is one of his characters from his story. I think it's Hoshizuru. I'm not quite sure the pronunciation, but it's a character that was in his illustrations and animations for his short stories. This is the Google bar design. When you go to Google, they sometimes change it to honor different people. This was the design on his 85th birthday, just to kind of honor him as a science fiction writer. Here's some covers and some illustrations of some of his short stories. Hoshi thought it was really, really important as a science fiction author. He regarded the idea of the criticism of civilization to be the most desirable element of science fiction. And what that means is he meant to criticize the things that he noticed in civilized society that was problematic, that was a problem that people weren't really thinking through. And that's really kind of the idea of science fiction, is to take an element of our civilization and develop it, what it might look like in the future and why that might not work out well. Now, his efforts to do this criticism of civilization are very, very apparent, very blatant in a lot of his works. And it shows that he is really attacking the idea of how society views things, how they do things, and its follies. Okay, I want you to know what follies means. So on your notes, if you have that, put down that follies means foolishness or foolish decisions. Things that they do are just silly. Now, this is a typical short story of Hoshi. In this particular short story, this man gets up. Well, he doesn't get up. This man, in a typical morning, this man is woken up by his technology, by his robot in his home, and the technology gets him up and shaves him and showers him and gets his breakfast and turns on the TV while he's eating, and it kind of shuffles him on this kind of conveyor belt kind of thing. And he's put in his traveling pod and he's taken to work automatically. So it's this world where he doesn't have to do anything. Everything is done automatically for him because of technology. It just takes care of everything. So he's in this traveling pod and he gets taken to his office and gets kind of conveyed on this conveyor belt into his office. And it's only then when he arrives at work that people in his office start noticing that he's been dead since the previous night. And this idea of technology shuffling us around and doing all these things for us when we're actually dead and gone was kind of a novel and interesting idea at the time. And it was very ironic that people became so reliant on technology that they can get, dressed and have their teeth brushed and be shaved and all of this stuff, and they're not even alive because technology doesn't recognize whether you're alive, whether you're appreciating it, whether you're dead, whether, you're conscious of anything. What connection can we make to another text? That connection will be There Will Come Soft Rains, the short story by Ray Bradbury, and also There Will Come Soft Rains by Sarah Teasdale, because the idea in both of those were we think we're so completely important to everything that goes around us, everything that's going on. And in reality, nature really doesn't recognize that we're there. Technology really doesn't recognize that we're there. And that we're really just kind of like a part of this whole scheme of things. Hoshi's science fiction story, Hey Come On Out, is the one we're going to read, and it was published in the Best Japanese Science Fiction Stories, and that was done in 1989. So the genre of that, if you're writing it down in your notes, is that of science fiction. Now, just to give you a little bit of background on why Hoshi wrote this story, here's some kind of facts about Japan between the 1950s and 1960s, and they kind of are comprised of environmental disasters. And it kind of starts in 1950 when Japan's pollution problems began with mercury pollution. You had a disease in 1965 that hit, and because of pollution, it was just like so widespread. 1969, air pollution was so bad that oxygen was handed out in the streets to people, and many people died. In 1970, Japan was ruled one of the world's most polluted countries. 1973, major chemical companies were blamed for this mercury infection of the citizens. 1989, the emission of greenhouse gases were blamed specifically on Japan as well as the Soviet Union and the United States. And greenhouse gases are their emissions. Cars do a lot of it. And I don't know if you've ever seen, but a lot of Japanese and some Eastern countries, a lot of times they're portrayed before we wore masks, they wore masks because of the pollution. Here we see some pictures right there. This is in Japan. And we can see how bad the pollution was at that point in time. Probably not going to swim on that beach. How about you? Okay, point of view in this story. The point of view employed in this story is third person omniscient. And third person omniscient means it's written from the he or she or a name point of view, and then it's by an all-knowing, all-seeing narrator. So that's third person omniscient. The setting is a small fishing village in Japan. The setting is supposed to indicate the 20th century, which would be like a modern day setting. And the significance of that setting is it's a fishing village. So the people in this fishing village depend on the setting itself. They need this water and this setting to make their livelihood, to catch the fish, and they're able to pay their way, and that's their career, that's how they make their money, is because of the setting. Okay, let's take a look at a plot diagram. I don't know if this is something you've done before in other classes, but this particular story falls really interestingly on a plot diagram. At the bottom there, we have the exposition or the introduction. And the exposition or the introduction of this story, and you've read it by this point, is that this typhoon, this storm has hit and it has passed, and the villagers find to their surprise that the shrine that's in their village was washed away, and in its place where it used to be, it's leaving this big gaping hole. So that's the exposition. Okay, they're rising action. They're investigating this hole. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it's about. They don't know what they're supposed to do about it. They ask themselves, what is it? Is it a foxhole? They shout into it and it seems to have no bottom. They throw a rope into it. They throw a pebble into it. And really, they just can't determine what it is. It's just this bottomless, huge hole. Now, the conflict and the climax is the city's getting bigger. The city's big. They have like used this hole to make money. They've sold it to the concessionaire, and they've built things, and they've made progression. They made the city bigger and possibly better, depending on your viewpoint. And you've got this worker at the top of this construction site, at the top of this building, and he's looking around the skyline and thinking how much this small fishing village has progressed because they were able to get rid of all this stuff, this trash, into this huge hole. Now, really, we don't have any falling action in this because the story ends really, really abruptly. The story ends when we know, as we've read the story, they find this mysterious hole. They don't know what it's about. They have scientists look at it, and of course, the scientists like, "Oh, fill it in. We don't know. We don't care." And then you have all these people looking into it. You had the photographer who was going to like go down in it, and they realized nothing came back out of it. So he thought better of that. And they decide they're just going to use this to like get rid of stuff. They're going to fill it in. They sell it to this concessionaire, and they're going to dump toxic waste in it. And they're going to dump like, bodies into it. They're going to dump like the homeless people into it. They're going to dump old papers and diaries. And the hole just kind of swallows up this stuff, and they don't ever have to deal with it again. And the idea is, you make this mess, you make this trash, you create this problem, and you dump it into this hole, and you never have to worry about it. It's this really quick, easy idea of getting rid of your problems without having to worry about the consequences. So now the falling action is not there because when we have that man, that construction worker, standing up on top of that building, looking at this skyline, thinking how much the city has grown, the village has grown, and how much better it looks now that they've been able to like sell this whole space. They're using this space and they're selling this space so that people can just dump things in. It's this huge dump area. He's standing on the top of that building, and all of a sudden he hears this shout, and it harkens back to the beginning of the story where somebody shouted into the hole. And then as he's standing there, he doesn't notice it, but the reader notices because we're told that this pebble just abruptly falls out of the sky right behind him. So what we're led to understand is they had the shrine is washed away. They, instead of rebuilding the shrine, which would have been the logical thing to do, they see this hole and they decide they're going to sell this hole and they're going to rebuild the shrine somewhere else. The idea here is that they're going to sell this space to make money, to capitalize on this, and to get more stuff, more roads, newer buildings, things like that. Because they kind of trade in their spiritual shrine for what it can do for them as far as monetary things. And they're dumping all this trash and dumping all this stuff in, thinking that they never have to worry about it again. It's really quick, easy solution. But when we see this person shouting into it at the beginning, we see them, throw the pebble in to see how deep it is. And nothing happens until the very end, where that construction worker is standing there and the pebble comes out right behind him. So we understand as a reader that there's some kind of strange anomaly with this hole, and all of this stuff that they have dumped into this hole thinking that it's a quick easy fix is going to fall right back into their city, and it's going to ruin what was their village, which was a nice quiet lucrative village where they could go fishing. And they traded all that in so they could dump this trash in this hole. And now that trash is going to mysteriously fall out of the hole in the sky and back into their village again, which is going to completely destroy their village and their fishing business. Okay, the conflict in this story is a pretty common one. It's man versus nature. In this story, we have man taking advantage of nature, using all of nature to like absorb the problems that man has created for himself. All the trash, all the junk, all the waste, and throwing it into this hole, just expecting nature to accept it. And what we see, of course, at the end is nature just dumps it right back at the men. The theme of this story is when people mistreat the environment, when they trade things in that they know they should treat better, the shrine and nature itself, when they do this for selfish purposes to make monetary gain, that there's going to be some consequences. There's going to be somebody that has to pay for this. Something negative is going to happen. And ultimately, we're going to pay for that. We're going to pay for the idea of like throwing things away and mistreating nature. And we're seeing that as we go forward in the world. We see that the trash that we create, that it, piles up the pollution we create, it like has an effect on our health and our air. All of these things, we do have to pay for it eventually. Now, what is irony? In literature, what we call situational irony is when something happens within the story that we wouldn't have thought would have happened. We didn't expect it. It turns out differently than what we might have predicted. So, in this story, the irony is that the village trades in this oldest spiritual relic, something that should have meant something, something that should have been significant to them, something that should have been not necessarily religious, but definitely spiritual. And they trade it in for commercial purposes. They're willing to sell out the shrine and what it covered to make money because they can get a new shrine and they can get a new building and they can get a new road. So why not? So they do this and they look at it as taking a shortcut to like get rid of all the problems and to hide the things they want to hide and just like in quick, easy fix to all the mess and the trash of their life. And what happens is in the end, ironically, it comes right back down on their heads. It comes right back at them. Now, three things for symbolism, and you should have that on your notes. The whole itself is your main symbol in this story. And what this whole symbolizes in this story is mankind's tendency to take the easy way out, to like get rid of things without really worrying about what the best way is. They just do the easy way. So it's thoughtless disposal, just like producing and disposing things without thinking about the future ramifications. The second symbol is the shrine itself. This represents the village, what it should have had as far as spirituality, what it should have had as far as respect for things that we don't necessarily understand, but we know that it's worthy of our respect. The shrine and nature and what it covered up, they all treated it with respect until this typhoon blew it over, and then they're like, oh, whatever, we'll get rid of that. Really doesn't matter anymore, and we'll make some money in the meantime. The third symbol is like the new buildings, the new construction, the new road, everything they got for selling that idea of the whole and having people shovel all of their crap into it. This is symbolizing the idea of selling out their respect for what they need to have respect for, selling out their spirituality, selling out their idea of how things need to be respected, and trading that in for something that's new and different and better, and gaining something as far as money or monetary value in the meantime. Like, why have the spiritual respect when we can trade it in and we can make some money off of that? So that's what that symbol is for. Okay, now we're going to look at some passages throughout the story. And the reason we're doing this is because when you go to Common Lit, it's going to ask you about these passages. These passages kind of allude to what the theme is. So this first passage says, one newspaper reporter tied a weight to the end of the long cord and lowered it into the hole. A long way down it went. The cord ran out, however, and he tried to pull it back out, but it would not come back up. Two or three people helped out, but when they all pulled too hard, the cord parted at the edge of the hole. Another reporter, camera in hand, who'd been watching all of this, quietly untied a stout rope that had been wound around his waist. So it might ask you on Common Lit why this reporter who had his camera, like what was he going to do with this stout rope around his waist? Well, of course he was going to try to go down into that hole and he was going to try to take some pictures. He's going to try to get a story or make some money out of taking some pictures and put like what he saw down there. But then when he noticed that this other cord went down and they tried to pull it back out, that they the cord broke and whatever was at the end of the cord just like stayed in the hole. He's like, well, that's probably not a good idea, so I don't want to do that. So that's kind of the idea of this passage. He decided that that's a bad idea. I've looked and seen what happened with the first person that did that, and I don't want those consequences. I don't want to end up at the bottom of that hole. So that's what that passage indicates. Now, our next passage is this one, and it's paragraphs 18 through 19, and I'm going to read it to you. It says the scientist contacted people at his laboratory and had them bring out a high powered bullhorn with which he was going to check out the echo from the hole's bottom. He tried switching through various sounds, but there was no echo. The scientist was puzzled, but he could not very well give up with everyone watching him so intently. He put the bullhorn right up to the hole, turned it to the highest volume, and let it sound continuously for a long time. It was a noise that would have carried several dozen kilometers above ground, but the hole just calmly swallowed up the sound. In his own mind, the scientist was at a loss, but with a look of apparent composure, he cut off the sound and, in a manner suggesting that the whole thing had a perfectly plausible explanation, said simply, "Fill it in." Now, this passage indicates you've got this scientist who goes out there to investigate this hole, and he takes this big, loud, bullhorn, something you can talk through or something you make sounds through, and he's going to try to like put this sound into the hole and try to get an echo to see how deep it is, to see what's going on. So he puts it through and he puts on these like different sounds, trying to get the echo, trying to see how deep it is, trying to figure out what this hole is. But he doesn't know. He doesn't understand this hole is a complete mystery to him. But now he can't admit that to anybody watching him because he's a scientist and he has a reputation to protect. So he does what many people do in the face of everybody looking to them for an answer, and he just pretends like he knows what's going on. So he just like turns off the horn and just says, "Fill it in, no big deal." Now, that passage indicates that he just wasn't willing to admit that he didn't know what was going on. And he didn't want to admit the mystery of this, and he didn't want to admit the idea that he just didn't know. And so he just kind of brazens on ahead and tells people what he thinks is the best thing to tell him, hoping that there's no repercussions for that. And of course, we realize at the end there are several repercussions of that, because we see that sound start coming out of the hole, and we see that pebble come out of the hole, and we know everything that's been put in that hole is going to eventually fall out onto the village and onto people's heads right out of the sky. The next passage, the whole gave peace of mind to the dwellers of the city. They concentrated solely on producing one thing after another. Everyone disliked thinking about the eventual consequences. People wanted only to work for production companies and sales corporations. They had no interest in becoming junk dealers. But it was thought these problems too would gradually be resolved by the whole. Now that's paragraph 38, and here's the idea behind this passage. This hole, because they think they can just drop whatever they want into it and they don't ever have to worry about the mess that's left behind. They can just make as much as they want. They can have as much waste or pollution or trash. They don't have to worry about that anymore. They can all just kind of, make new stuff and not have to deal with anything old, or not have to, reuse anything. They can just make all this new stuff because you can just shovel all of this trash and all this refuse and all this waste right into that hole. That hole is resolving their problem or solving their problem. They don't want to have to worry about the mess or the cleanup. They just shove it in there and forget about it. It's an easy solution to a question or a problem that didn't have an easy answer up until this point. Now, this passage is from paragraph 44 and 45. And it reads, "But in the sky to which he lifted his gaze, there was nothing at all. A clear blue sky merely spread over all. He thought it must be his imagination. Then, as he resumed his former position, from the direction where the voice had come, a small pebble skimmed by him and fell on past. The man, however, was gazing in idle reverie at the city's skyline growing ever more beautiful, and he failed to notice." Okay, so here's the idea of this passage. This is right at the end. This is at the end, at the conclusion. This is our abrupt ending. you've got this construction work on the top of the building, and he's looking around and he's admiring this city skyline, which he considers to be even more beautiful because they've traded in the idea of this small village to make this big city, to make this big skyline with bigger buildings and bigger things. So he's thinking how beautiful it looks and how wonderful it looks. And he hears this kind of voice above him. So he turns to look to where he thought he heard the voice, and he doesn't see anything. He just sees this clear blue sky. So he's thinking, oh, well, it's my imagination, no big deal, I don't have to worry about it. And he goes back to his former position of like admiring the sky and admiring the buildings and thinking, how lucky they are to be building all this new stuff from this little small village. And the reader sees behind him from the sky, from where the voice had come, this small pebble that just like falls by him and falls down to the ground. And we understand in that moment that everything, all the trash and all the stuff, all the nuclear waste and all of the bodies of the homeless and everything they referred to, all the diaries and the papers of the people, everything they thought they could put in there safely and it was forgotten, all of that stuff is going to fall right down, right over their heads and into this village turned city. And they're going to have to suffer the consequences of this thoughtless disposal. They're going to have to see what you put into something, it's going to come back to you. If you do something that's negative, like create all this trash and this junk, then you're going to have to pay for it at some point in time. There is no easy way out. There's no way that you can avoid these consequences. Now, when you do your common lit, a lot of the answers I just talked about a little bit with the passages, but there's going to be a writing question on there, and the writing question is going to say, identify the theme of the story and explain how it develops over the course of the text. Use at least 3 pieces of evidence from the story to support your answer. Now, I'm going to grade this as a writing section. It's going to be worth 15 points. So we'll want a complete constructed response. I want an introduction restating the question. This is what the theme is and this is how it develops. I want 3 pieces of evidence from the story, and I want you to write that in a way that's like an essay. I'm going to grade it on Common Lit for 15 points, but it will go in the grade book as a writing grade. Okay, so I think that is it. Yep, that is it. So those are the notes. Most of those things will show up on Common Lit and will show up on your Socrative quiz later. So if you have any questions about that story, just let me know. Come to one of the Google Meets or give me an email or whatever you need to do. All right. Thanks for listening.